I think, early on, I felt the need to be much more controlling and, like parental even in business. And now it's much more like, let's do this together. Like, open book, open heart. I like being wrong because that means that we found a better way.
Hey guys, it's Dr. Alok, aka Dr. Rewire. I am here with a super guest at the Rewire Your Life podcast, where we take people's lives and realize why they've rewired them to live a life of inspiration, to be able to grow where they're at to where they want to go. And today, my guest is none other than Josh Linkner, who is no small man to success and achievement. And he's gone ahead. Let me read his bio for you. He's a creative troublemaker, which we've got to find out what more of that means. He passionately believes that all human beings have incredible creative capacity, and he's on a mission to unlock innovative thinking and creative problem solving to help leaders, individuals, and communities soar. He's been a founder of CEO in 5 tech companies, which sold for a combined value of over $200 million. And he's the author of 4 books, including the New York Times bestsellers, Disciplined, Dreaming, and The Road to an Invention. He's invested and mentored over 100 startups and is the founding partner of Detroit Venture Partners. Today, Josh serves as the chairman and co-founder of Platypus Labs, an innovation research training consulting firm. He's twice been named the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year and the recipient of the United States Presidential Champion of Change Award. Josh is a passionate Detroiter, father of 4, and is a professional jazz guitarist, and has a slightly odd obsession for greasy pizza. Well, let me first of all welcome Josh. Welcome to the show. Great to have you here.
Thanks so much. Awesome to be with you.
Thank you so much. I know that the greasy pizza, you got to come down to Chicago quite a bit to get the real greasy pizza, I'm sure, once in a while.
Well, I am a pizza connoisseur, not an official one, of course, but I love pizza of all kinds, shapes, sizes. But so Detroit pizza, my hometown, it's sort of like half the thickness of Chicago pizza. The cheese goes all the way to the edge and they put the sauce on top. And it's actually, I love every style, thick, thin, whatever, but give Detroit style a try. We're going to give you in Chicago a run for your money.
I'm game. I'll try it. I'll try anything once. That's what they like to say. Let me ask you this. Let's cut right into it. So what's a creative troublemaker? What does that mean?
Well, to me, it doesn't mean being offensive or hurtful, just to be clear. It's a playful term, but the idea is that we're someone who's willing to challenge the conventional approaches, sort of stick your finger in the eye of traditional thinking and explore what's possible. When you really think about progress from discovering a new drug therapy to art and music and civilization, it came from people who had a deep disregard for the status quo and a desire to lean into change, desire to imagine not what was, but what can be. So it's being focused on what's possible instead of just what is, and it's allowing your creativity to lead the way as opposed to sort of the rigid mechanics of the past.
How did you develop that creativity in yourself? Because that's something unique, and business is so logic and it's so, I'll call it rigid from the standpoint that it's
numbers, it's stats, it's strategy. How did you take on this term of creative, and how did you learn to foster your creativity in this journey?
First of all, I developed creativity because I like playing music and stuff, but the truth is that we're all creative. I know you're thinking about rewiring and from the doctor perspective, but human beings, and I've done decades of research on this, human beings are hardwired to be creative. That's our natural state. Now, we can be creative in our own ways. It doesn't have to be in a traditional artistic sense. You don't have to paint on canvas or play an instrument. You could be creative in the way you run a spreadsheet, the way you start a sales call, the way you engage with a team member. But truthfully, we could all be creative. And I believe it's the single most powerful tool at our disposal to drive the outcomes that we seek. And I really believe that there are 7 billion people, to be precise, on this planet, me included, with dormant creative capacity. And if we can unlock that, if we can bring that to the surface, the world is just a better place. That's the answer we're looking for. It's inside of us right now. And just real quickly on your point about business being rigid, that probably was true in the past. When we were in an industrial age where things are about precision and accuracy and alignment and all that. But today in the knowledge age, certainly coming out of the COVID crisis, we're in a defining moment. And I think that what's happened is that many of those hard skills of the past have been commoditized, outsourced, or automated. Whereas creativity, I believe, has become the single most important attribute for us to lead in the business world. And even the World Economic Forum came out recently with their top attributes for the future of work. And 4 of the top 5 tied to human creativity. In other words, the sort of rigorous number crunching stuff of the past, that's just the ante to play. But the way you succeed, the way you win, the way you serve customers and build a viable culture is leaning in to this gift of inventive thinking and creative problem solving, this gift that we all have.
I'd love to, and I agree with you. I couldn't agree with you more, actually. But I'd love for you to define creativity in your own terms, because I think it's a vague term in the respect that some people will take creativity in the form of art or music or that capacity. But let's take it in the form of business and define creativity for the listeners.
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I'm sure there's multiple definitions, but here's mine. Creativity is simply imagining something that doesn't exist. Yeah. So, for example, if I went out back and painted your car purple, presumably your car is not purple. That doesn't exist. In other words, I had to invent that in my mind. Now, creativity alone, though, doesn't mean it's useful. Like if I did that to your car, you'd probably be pretty pissed off at me.
Sure.
Innovation is the sort of the next step, double click inside the word creativity. Innovation is creativity that's useful. So there's a utility value to it. So instead of that sloppy paint on your car, if I invented a technology where you could push a button on your dashboard and every day select a new color for your car, that would be an innovation because there's some utility value to it. So that's how I think about it. Creativity is just imagining something that doesn't yet exist, and innovation is putting it into practical terms. The other thing I'll just say, because I'm fascinated by this, think of innovation in 3 flavors. All caps, the word all caps, innovation. That's like inventing the printing press and the internet and the automobile. And these are the big things that we always think of with innovation, but they're also pretty far out of reach for most human beings. But then think of the word innovation just with a capital I and the rest lowercase. Those are the 3 or 4 big ideas that any one of us might have every year that could really have a meaningful impact in our lives and businesses. And then my favorite is the all lowercase innovation. And this is the often, disregarded, ugly stepchild of it or whatever, but these to me are micro innovations, or I call them big little breakthroughs. But these are the 5 or 6 little ideas that each of us can cultivate every day. And when you think of creativity and innovation as more of a way of life than waiting around for this once a decade giant silver bullet idea, it's way less risky. It's way more accessible. You're building critical skills, and those little ideas add up. So to me, the best way to embrace innovation organizationally is, instead of these swing for the fences moonshots, is to cultivate high velocity, high volume, the little baby innovations. Again, it's much more pragmatic and frankly, a lot more fun.
I see that completely. And actually, it correlates to the way that we think, and the brain actually works from the neuroscience perspective as well, right? And what you just said, like with the big innovation, when you look at it, like setting the big giant goal, for example, that's not strategically aligned or strategically planned out, that doesn't make any sense. The brain doesn't know that. The dopamine just shuts off and says that doesn't work. But if you take these micro innovations, like you're saying, on a day-to-day basis, our brain gets these micro dopamine hits with this creativity, and then you in essence foster and train yourself to become creative in that fashion. Am I correct in saying that?
You are exactly right. And one thing I'd love to get your feedback on, from a brain science standpoint. So we all know the term neuroplasticity at this point. Essentially, it's the notion that your brain capacity isn't fixed, that you can, physically make changes in your brain over time. I know you're an expert in this. I coined a new phrase, which may be to the chagrin of the scientific community, but I believe it, innoplasticity, which basically means that your creativity, your ability to be creative, is also malleable. I like to say creativity is like your weight, not your height. Like I try as I may, I'm like 5'5" on a good day. So I'm probably not going to grow another foot by next week, even if I'm really committed, Sure. But my weight, I absolutely can control based on nutrition and exercise and everything else. I believe your creativity is just like that. So even someone who says, oh, I'm not creative, I can't play a violin, I think we can develop these learnable skills, back to this concept of neuroplasticity, or in my case, innoplasticity, which is Sure. essentially saying that human creativity can grow physically just in the same way that brain chemistry can expand.
Well, it's really, it does work hand in hand, right? Because creativity in your highest values is what this is really about. Because these micro innovations that you're talking about, you're going to get them on a day-to-day basis. We're all going to get them. And the more we can foster them through neurology and through science, and then taking the actions behind it, and then giving ourselves the feedback, allows us to then get the feedback and saying that we're more creative. Just like the first time, I'm sure, like for you, when you played the guitar the first time, right? The first time you didn't know what you're doing. You got maybe a couple of notes. I know nothing about guitar, so bear with me, my ignorance, right? But it started that way for everyone. For my son plays soccer, and it's a training process you've got to go through. First, you learn how to dribble, then you learn how to kick, then you know how to do moves. But it's that creative process that comes inside that. Do you think that the music world has really helped you foster this for yourself? And do you recommend that people take an art or some sort of an art form around it to help them get these the innoplasticity, as you're calling it?
So it has helped me definitely because I'm very passionate about music. I've been playing for 40 years. That's sort of my muse, and it's inspiring to me, and I push the creative boundaries. That being said, I don't think that someone has to play music to be creative or do art or dance or interpretive, rap music or whatever else. I think it's important that any of us have a muse of some kind. Maybe your muse is nature. Maybe it's your passionate relationship with your partner. Maybe it's fashion. So I think as long as we have something that lights us up on fire a bit, I think that's more important than is it a classical creative act. And back to guitar, though, I'll say something that I find just super cool. So Malcolm Gladwell talks about this 10,000 hour rule, which he originally talked about to master something, to be world renowned at a field. But it somehow got misinterpreted that you need to spend 10,000 hours to learn a new skill, which was very far from the truth. Back to guitar. So the first 20 hours that I spent learning to play guitar, I could play a few chords. I went from zero to playing a scale sloppily, by the way. But my learning curve was like straight up cliff. And then over time, actually, now that I've been playing for 40 years, I could spend 6 months working on something. And I'm only gonna have a little teeny improvements. So like Serena Williams, the growth that she had in tennis playing her first 20 hours is very different than the 20 hours she spent recently. The reason I bring all this up is that for those that are new to this thinking, that's saying, gosh, I never thought of myself as creative. Do I need to study for 20 years and read all these books? The answer is no. The first piece of that learning curve is where you're going to see the biggest benefit. So even if you invest 5 hours over the next 5 months, like it doesn't have to be a heavy lift, you're going to see a meaningful boost. And those finer strokes will come later. But the point is, you don't have to become the next Picasso to inject creativity in your life and enjoy special outcomes as a result.
But don't you think that there has to be some consistency involved in that, right? Like you're saying 5 hours over the next 5 months, that's not going to bring a consistency to it. Like you're going to start and it's going to fall apart, start and fall apart. In your experience in this, there's got to be some level of consistency that's got to take place to develop this, no?
Yeah, you bring up a great point. So let's just back to music. If I spent 5 hours practicing one day and then put it down for the next 29 days, learning is going to crash. But if I spent like 5 minutes a day practicing, it would be very good. So you're exactly right. Consistency beats, massive, just like the gym. Like, if it's New Year's, we're here in the new year and everyone's got their New Year's resolution. If I went to the gym and worked out for 8 hours straight, I would not drop 10 pounds and be ripped. But if I did that consistently and worked out over time, that's when the real benefits ensue. So I totally agree. But the point I want to make, though, is just super clear, is you don't have to invest years and years. You don't have to invest billions of dollars and all kinds of time and energy and sacrifice, because you're awakening something that's already there. These are skills that the mind will learn pretty quickly. And with a little bit, not a lot, a little bit of daily practice, you're going to see it's a high leverage activity. Like a little extra creativity will yield a disproportionately large set of outcomes.
I agree with you completely. Consistency is a massive thing that people overlook very often. I completely agree with that. They do it a couple times a week versus daily, right? Anything that you want to ingrain, you've got to do daily. It's got to be that little bit, as you're saying, the micro innovations, micro wins, as I call them, whatever that is inside that capacity.
Real quickly, I'll just share. I still do this today. So I study creativity. I think of myself as a student more than a master, but I literally spend 2 minutes, not 20, 2 minutes every morning, my little ritual. Here's what I do. First minute. They say in software engineering, if you want to change the outputs, you got to change the inputs. Same is true in most things, including creativity. So I spend literally 1 minute a day soaking in the creativity of others. I might watch a band on YouTube. Maybe I'll stare at a painting or I'll read a poem out loud. It's just to get my juices flowing. The second minute, I do an unrelated problem. So I might look at my favorite news source today and see that traffic has been up 31% in the Atlanta metro area. Has nothing to do with me. I don't live in Atlanta. I'm not a traffic expert. And here's what you do for 1 minute. Instead of saying, how could I solve that? Because we generally look for silver bullet solutions and miss the target. I say, could I spend 1 minute coming up with lots of little teeny ideas that might help the problem? Maybe one would be a staggered commute. Maybe one would be different types of lane. Maybe one would be more focused on public transport, et cetera, et cetera. So the idea is to take on a problem that you have no direct impact on your own life. So there's no pressure. And it's almost like doing jumping jacks for your creativity. So 1 minute a day guzzling inputs, 1 minute a day on an unrelated problem to your personal world. And 30 days in, you're going to start building some really sweet creative chops.
I absolutely love that. From a neuroplasticity standpoint or an innoplasticity standpoint, as you're calling it, I completely love that idea because there's no attachment to it. It's simply just training you to think, right? Training you to think. I like to say that, thinking is a thing, right? It's a thing that we actually have to do to balance our brain, to rewire. It's an active process that you have to do. And the first few times you do it, it's challenging. There's no question, because we've been ingrained to think in this old way, but now to do it differently, the first few times is a little bit challenging. But if you get practice on it, it becomes easier, just like this. And this is solution-oriented problems that can be tackled on a day-to-day basis. I love that. I like that is going in my company today. There's no question. I love that. Thank you so much. Tell me, when you started in the tech space, you built these companies and you sold them off, and can you talk to us about the journey of that? Because a lot of people who are listening to this may be new entrepreneurs, right? And I think there's this discrepancy of conversation in entrepreneurs, and I call it 3 different levels of entrepreneurs. So I say that there's the intropreneur, right, who's kind of in the introductory phase, but really not fully in the entrepreneurial space. And then you have kind of the propreneur, which is kind of in the process of becoming an entrepreneur, but they're not fully there. And then you really have the entrepreneurs who are in the game, they're playing, and then they want to grow, they want to scale. And then I consider the real entrepreneurs those who want to really play it large inside that, to want to sell, VCs, angel investors, all that. When you take your company, you started from inception to exit. Can you talk about the psychology and creativity, how that came along as you went through that process of business development rather than just the product idea?
Sure, happy to. I also have run now 2 venture capital funds, so I kind of live in the world of entrepreneurship all the time. First of all, I just want to honor and celebrate entrepreneurs wherever they are in the journey, whether they're opening a single unit dry cleaner or their next Facebook. There's not a judgment. I mean, anyone who's creating something new, creating jobs, creating positive impact on the world, serving customers in a better way, that's an honorable thing to do. And I celebrate, in other words, someone's not less of an entrepreneur in my mind because they have a smaller business. That's just, they're still pretty darn cool in my book. So a couple things that I do. I think, a dead focus on the problem that you're solving. So I don't think going into a company, starting a business just to make money is necessarily the best approach. Rarely will you find it, by the way. More often, it's being really committed to solving a problem. Maybe there's a customer pain point. Maybe there's a problem that you've experienced in the world. Maybe you see a situation that just could be way better. So it's this disregard with the status quo. It's this dissatisfaction with the way things are, and being really committed to solving the problem, and ideally for something more than just selfish gain. The bigger calling is the thing that gets you through those dark moments, because entrepreneurship there's a lot of ups and downs. Like, it's a full contact sport. Entrepreneur sounds like this fancy word where you're having tea with white gloves. It's more of like a street fight. Like you're getting punched in the gut, you jump up and you're bloodied and battered. And a lot of it is just persistence and resilience and tenacity. But I think what gets you through it is if you feel like you're working for something that's important for the betterment of the world, as opposed to just, getting rich. And by the way, funny enough, I've learned anyway that when you chase purpose and impact, the money comes as a byproduct. Whereas if all you chase is money, you rarely find it. But the other thing I would just say is, I would start by figuring out who you are more than what you do. And what I mean by that is, what are the fundamental values? What are the underpinnings? What's your operating system? How do you make decisions? And that takes real work. If anyone wants to look at an example, I have a venture capital fund that I just launched recently called Mudita Venture Partners, MUDITA. And just if you go to muditaventurepartners.com, you'll see my values listed out for the world to see. I share them with everybody. And whenever I start a new business, now these are the values that I believe in. And I'll tell you a couple of them. One of them is it's called using every drop of toothpaste, which is a playful way of saying, being scrappy and resourceful. One of them is give generously, don't keep score, which is this notion of abundance instead of scarcity. So you're not going to borrow any of mine if anyone listening, but whether these align or you create your own, that's not the key point. The key point is have a set of values. Make the decisions for you and your team, not by operating procedure, but by who you are. If you lock down who you are, the what's going to change over the years. The technology will change, your customer base may change, but if you really lock down who you are, you're a big step along in the process.
I have an interesting question. Like you said, things will change. And it's very often because we're in the middle of a couple of tech startups ourselves in healthcare that we're trying to work on. And real interesting question along that line is, like, how many times have you seen a business go a certain direction and completely have to pivot the entire thing, especially in tech, right? Where it's supposed to work, but now you've got a completely different business 2 years later from where you started. How many times have you seen that in the industry, or even in your own businesses for that matter?
I think it's more, how many times haven't you seen that? Which is, it's pretty rare. And seriously, most businesses don't do that. You have this wonderful idea and it might be directionally interesting, but really it's often flawed. And you only figure it out over the series of experimentation and pivoting and adapting to changing circumstances. I mean, one example, I invested in this lovely entrepreneur named Greg Schwartz. He had a business called Up2. I loved him. The business was pretty cool. We funded it. I took a board role and it didn't work out the way we hoped. And as much as we tried, it just wasn't locking, but he pivoted and adapted, and to his credit, rebranded the company, took a different direction. Today, the company, it's called StockX for anyone who's interested in. The company was recently valued at $3.8 billion. And so had Greg just thrown up his arms in defeat because his original idea didn't, manifest, that would have been a massive miss. But it was his ability to be fluid and to adapt that allowed him to enjoy such extraordinary results.
How important is it for an entrepreneur to detach from their idea?
Very. Yeah. I mean, there's a saying that, great companies, it's not about the entrepreneur. It's about the company as the king, not the entrepreneur. So you're there in service of a calling, in service of a mission or a vision, not to, get the corner office and have, your picture in the media and such. And it's funny, I've invested in many entrepreneurs, and the characteristics that I see that work are not what you might think. You might think it's Steve Jobs, like, big charisma and larger than life and very, mercurial and demanding. I think Steve Jobs was successful despite those things, not because of them. The entrepreneurs that I've seen be successful have humility. They're open-minded. They're focused on results. They're happy to share the credit or even give the credit to others completely. They're lifelong learners. They're going to outwork the person next to them instead of, dump all the grunt work on somebody else. They're willing to get messy. And so it's not necessarily the person with the loudest voice that wins. It's often the person that's the most humble and open-minded.
I couldn't agree with you more. In my experience in learning and watching and studying entrepreneurs, it's like you have this certain segment in the population that is, look at me, but then the real ones that are the consistent winners are the quiet winners, is kind of what I like to say, right? They're quietly, humbly just winning and just crushing life, crushing their game, and they're not really making a whole lot of noise. And it's amazing to watch that, right? In your journey as an entrepreneur, a business person, an author, what has been probably one of the most rewarding things you've been able to do?
Thank you for that question. It's not what you would think. So I've been very fortunate to achieve, wonderful economic outcomes, probably more than I deserve, and beyond grateful. But when I look back over the last 30 years of scaling companies, it wasn't the big check that is the most rewarding. It's when Jenny walks in and says, "Hey, Josh, I you don't know if you know me or not. I work at your company. This is my 2-year anniversary. Listen, my husband and I just bought a house, and we're the first person in either family of ours to be homeowners." That's a rewarding moment. Or when someone calls you and says, "Hey, Josh, I listened to you give a speech 3 years ago, and it changed my life in the following ways. And here's what I'm doing now. I just wanted to share it with you." So I find that, the deepest rewards are those intrinsic rewards where you've made a difference in other people's lives. I know it sounds like a postcard or something, but I really mean it from the heart. Like, it's not the fancy car or the house that's gonna really fuel you. That's not the real juice. The real juice is leaving your fingerprints out in the world, leaving your mark and helping other people out. There's nothing more intrinsically rewarding than that. And for me anyway, also the expression of creativity. Like, if I can express something creatively and that moves other people in a positive direction, that's doubly rewarding, because not only did you help, but you also helped create.
I think it's so important. And what we talked about in my world, we say that the mission is to be more important. The mission is more important than your own vision. The mission is grander, because the mission you'll serve, go through pursuit of pleasure and pain in order to pursue it. And I think you're saying the same thing, just in a different fashion, just completely, which I agree with.
It's funny, the new name of my venture fund, it's Mudita, M-U-D-I-T-A. And I'm sure most people aren't familiar with that. It's a Sanskrit term, which means taking joy in other people's success. There's a German word called Schadenfreude, which this is the opposite. That's taking joy in people's misery, like when you watch reality TV. But we wanted to build a fund that was exactly. This is around generosity and kindness and compassion. And I don't think that's not being wimpy. That's not being, lacking intensity or drive. It's that you don't need to be a raging jerk, in my mind, to be successful, even though there are many raging jerks that are. And so wouldn't it be more fun if we could be kind, generous, uplifting people, instead of putting your foot on someone's throat and squeezing out every drop of life, and enjoying success together? So I almost think of it as a kinder, gentler fund, but it's the intersection of compassion and intensity. It's still deeply intense, outcome focused, all the good things you'd want, but I just don't think you don't have to kick people down. This is a fund around lifting people up. And that's why we chose the name Mudita.
It's a beautiful name. Right? It's a beautiful name, and spelled M-U-D-I-T-A to learn more about it, right?
Yep, M-U-D-I-T-A, Sanskrit term.
I love that. I want to ask a couple technical questions. So in the journey of scaling, as a company goes through scale and it goes through its processes, what do you think is the hardest phase for a company to scale at?
You probably have played a video game in your life, and you're on level 1. It seems really hard till you get to level 2, and then level 2 seems really hard to get to level 3. I mean, they all have their intricacies and complexity, but 2 probably that really are tough. First of all, just launching something from nothing is hard. There's sort of this gravitational force that pulls you back. And they always say the space shuttle burns like 2/3 of its fuel just getting into orbit, and the other third can keep it up running for 2 weeks. And there's something to be said about that for startups. So it does take a lot of like intensity and energetic leadership to just bust through the atmosphere. The second thing I'll say is there's a tweener phase, like when you are big enough where you can't turn on a dime, but also still not big enough where you're sort of institutionally resourced. And so for me, like I went from one year I was 88 employees, the next year I was 265. And I at the time I was the CEO, the CMO, the head of HR, and like the chief financial officer.
Right.
And it sounds like I'm being all boastful. I was terrible. Like that was a mess. I disappointed people. It was awful and tragic. But essentially scaling from like this only entrepreneurial place where everything's in people's mind to being something kind of like industrial grade, that's a tricky path to get across, because you really have to retool for scale and professionalism, as opposed to just like, oh, I could count on my close knit group of people. Not to say that other challenging times aren't also difficult, but those two, at least for me, were the more challenging ones.
I completely, I can see that. It's hard to be able to do that. And there's so many hats that we wear as entrepreneurs, right? In this podcast, we're talking about the health side of it, but the stress that leads to an individual and the breakdown emotionally, you have to have something that drives you through. And that's what we're talking about here is your mission, being able to serve. And you can see like a guy like Josh is super connected to humanity and being willing to serve people. And that's what it really stems to, in my opinion, inside of that. Josh, when you look at it, you've built these successes, you've built these journeys, and it's been great, I'm sure. But I bet probably the great, you'd trade it all in, or maybe you wouldn't trade it in, but the greatest success is probably those 4 beautiful children at home, isn't it?
Well, there's no question about that. So I have 2 older kids and 2 young. I have a 24 and a 22-year-old, and I have 5-year-old twins. So I'm getting a second chance on things. And yeah, I mean, there's nothing more difficult and challenging and frustrating and annoying, and also, of course, deeply intrinsically rewarding. And so, yeah, I mean, they're the loves of my lives, along with my wife, Tia, whom I just adore. And yeah, you're right. I mean, there's the economic value is great. And that to me, I just look at it as stored energy where you can help people out and create more value and such. But nothing beats the individual personal relationships. No question about it.
Let me ask you a creative question for you, just to fit this. As you probably were growing your businesses in the early phases of your life and building your economic career, you probably raised children differently than you do at this point now, with maturity and that as well. And how is that creative process now different than it was for the older you? Kind of different new forms of leadership, right? How's that different than relating that to family dynamics?
Well, I'm definitely a different leader than I was years ago. And frankly, I'm a different parent. I mean, I think I'm trying, patience has always been a problem for me. I'm impatient is in a bad way. I'm trying to improve on that. I'm trying to be more measured and less impulsive, which again, is not necessarily my strength. I think, early on, I felt the need to be much more controlling and, like parental even in business. And now it's much more like, let's do this together, open book, open heart. I like being wrong because that means that we found a better way, like as opposed to, having your ego bruised by it. So I just think that as you mature as a person, you probably become a better leader and certainly in my case, a better parent. Deeply proud of my older kids. I didn't, screw them up too bad, but you do, you just, with experience, like anything else, you do get better at it. And I think hopefully today I'm more measured and thoughtful. If anything, even though I've had some success, I'm probably more humble, and more hungry to continue to create impact and create stuff in the world and make a difference. But hopefully in a little bit more deliberate and measured way, a little less frenetic.
That makes so much sense. I love that. When you say this, and I want to close with these statements, because you say there's 7 top creativity myths, and I'll let you kind of go through those inside of that. And you say, well, I'll help you. You say that creativity is only needed for the top. You think that's a myth. Why do you say that's a myth?
Oh, 100% a myth. I mean, you don't need to be wearing a lab coat or a hoodie to be a creator. Mm-hmm. And companies are going to win when every single person in the team, whether there's 1,000 people or 100,000 or 50 people, are active everyday innovators. That's how you win. And so because we're moving at too fast of a pace of change and complexity for every single thing to be documented. So in the knowledge age, it's not just people following instructions, it's being able to think and use judgment and move forward in the face of volatility and ambiguity. And so I think you absolutely need to harness creativity at every level. It's not being inappropriate. It's not saying that someone should run down the hall and draw with purple crayons on the walls. It's saying use your creativity to drive the outcomes that a business is there to serve. But I really think that the best companies, the most sustainable companies, mission critical, that every person on that org chart is an innovator.
And I like number 7 as well. My technical skills and experience are enough. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, we're in a world where, so I graduated college late because I started a business. I graduated 2 years late in 1994. So here we are, and now it's 2022. Think about the technical skills I learned in college. Think about what there wasn't. There was no email. I didn't have a mobile phone. I didn't have Facebook. Like what? I thought Zoom was a verb. I didn't even, what? So just think about the world we're living in compared to when I learned my, sort of classically trained skill set, night and day. And if anything, the pace of change is only going to accelerate. So based on, nothing wrong with education, but I'm not at all, amazing, but we can't simply rely only on that and then just say, hey, I did all the learning I had to do, and now I'm just going to do what I already know. That's a surefire path to either mediocrity at best or completely being irrelevant at worst. I think it's incumbent on us to say, listen, I'm proud of my training, I'm proud of my background, but I need to be a reinventor in real time. It's funny, I say this all the time, that someday, I said this in my business first, someday a company will come along and put us out of business. It might as well be us. Yeah. And now I say that personally, someday someone's going to come along and put me out of business. It might as well be me. So I feel like it's incumbent on me to put the Josh of 6 months ago out of business, like every 6 months. And those that aren't reinventing and changing, I believe are going to be in a, pretty tough spot.
I agree with you completely. I was talking to an engineer, just an AI engineer, just the other day, and he was speculating, and speculative, I don't know this to be a fact, I'm not an AI expert by any capacity, you know far more about this space than I do, but he was speculating that we could be, by the year 2050, most jobs could be given to technology, and man is going to have to do things much more innovative to be able to sustain value and bring to the market space. What are your thoughts on that statement?
I think whether every job or many jobs, the directionally that's correct. And so again, we need to adapt. If the most marketable skill 100 years ago was having a strong back and being willing to do manual labor for long hours, that is not the most valuable skill today. And again, I keep getting back to the most valuable skill isn't the rote memorization that you learned in middle school. It's creative problem solving. It's inventive thinking. It's being able to navigate complexity and be decisive moving forward. It's being able to clearly articulate what we're trying to say and help people create alignment and precision. So anyway, I just think that we as a country and we as a business community absolutely need to evolve with the times, or else we're going to be running behind. There's a very famous Jack Welch quote, which basically said, he's the former CEO of General Electric, legendary CEO, that if the rate of change on the outside is greater than the rate of change on the inside, the end is near. And I think that not only applies to big companies, but applies to human beings as well.
I agree. I agree with you so much on that statement. Josh, this is a complete delight. Where can people learn more about you? I know you've got all these books, but where's your website where people can connect with you and learn more and connect with what you do?
Yeah, thanks so much. And even before that, I just want to say how much I appreciate the conversation and honor the great work that you're doing. It's really impressive. If you want to connect with me, a couple thoughts. First of all, check out biglittlebreakthroughs.com. That's the title of my new book. And certainly you can buy the book if you feel like it. But even if you don't, there's a whole bunch of free resources to help get your creative energies going. There's a free assessment tool. There's a quick start guide. There's a bunch of downloadable worksheets. So check that out. I think it can be helpful. If you want to learn more about me personally, my website is just my name, Josh Linkner. So that's joshlinkner.com. I'm on every social handle, just at Josh Linkner. And then if you're interested in chatting about our new venture fund, it's Mudita Venture Partners, MUDITA, venturepartners.com.
There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Josh, I want to thank you sincerely for being here, taking the time out of your schedule and just connecting with us and sharing your wisdom, your insights. I'll tell you, I love this. Many ideas to solve those problems every single day, 1 minute a day. Like that is... One of my mentors one time told me, Josh, he said, take one thing from every person you meet, and he goes, you can't stop, right? And that's my one thing that I took from you today. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Awesome, man. All right. Take care. Thanks again.
Thank you so much. This is the Rewire Your Life podcast. I'm Dr. Alok Trivedi, aka Dr. Rewire. If you valued this podcast, like it, share it with your friends. I'll see you guys on another video. Thanks a lot.
Hey guys, if you like that video, click on the link over here and you're going to love the next video.